and welcome to Talking Europe. One in, one out, a proposed plan to address the migration crisis in the EU outraged many. It was the only way forward for some, the solution. Downright illegal, cried others. Twice in as many weeks, EU leaders sat down with Turkey's Prime Minister to try and find a deal to exchange people for partnerships. In just a few moments, we'll be talking about EU-Turkey relations. But first, here's a snapshot of what came out of this latest summit.
After months of acrimony between the EU and Ankara over the migration crisis, a controversial deal.
We have finally reached an agreement between the EU and Turkey. The agreement aimed at stopping the flow of irregular migration via Turkey to Europe. All irregular migrants coming from Turkey into Greek islands as from the Sunday, the 20th of March, will be returned to Turkey.
Both refugees fleeing conflict and economic migrants will be affected by the agreement, irrespective of their country of origin. The plan will be implemented according to the so-called one-for-one principle. For every Syrian refugee returned to Turkey from the Greek islands, another will be resettled from Turkey to the EU. The aim, to reduce the incentive for people tempted to pay smugglers to take them on the perilous journey to Europe. German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who'd staked her political future on reaching a deal, voiced cautious satisfaction.
I have no illusions that what we agreed today won't be accompanied by further setbacks. But I think we've reached an agreement that has irreversible momentum.
As for what's in it for Turkey, Ankara will receive up to €6 billion in aid to help deal with its 2.7 million Syrian refugees, faster EU membership talks and unprecedented visa concessions for its citizens. The beaming Turkish Prime Minister described it as a historic day. But with news of the deal coming as the UN announced that over 1 million migrants were likely to arrive in Europe by sea alone this year, a comprehensive solution to the crisis still appears some way off.
So to what extent are relations between the two sides really changing? Should the joint action plan on migration be tied to EU membership? And is that really what's happening? Well, let's ask our guests. With me, I have German MEP Ska Keller. You're with the Green Party. On the opposite side, I have Greek MEP Stelios Kouloglou. You're with the European United Left. And beside you, I have Selçuk Gülashlı. You're a journalist, Turkish journalist with Zaman newspaper, one that was very recently taken over by Turkish authorities. Let me start perhaps with you, Mr. Kouloglou. You're from the country on the front line of this migration crisis, something like 2,000 people still arriving every day. What's your reaction to the EU focus on turning towards Turkey as the solution?
Well, it's one bad move after the other. I think the bad thing starts from the moment the Europeans are not taking their own responsibilities. You have to negotiate a solution with Turkey, of course, but not kind of, Anatolian bazaar, giving human rights and taking refugees, or giving refugees and, forgetting human rights. That's very bad.
How is that justifiable? Basically, somebody will have to risk their life to come to the EU for the EU to take somebody back from Turkey. How does this make things better or safer, Ms. Keller?
I think it simply doesn't make sense because, indeed, the incentive would ideally be then to stay in Turkey and wait for resettlement. But if that happens, you don't have people going to Greece, being sent back, and then being the one who's replaced by someone else. But in any case, if we look at the figures, the Council says that no new commitments will be taken. So that means that we have a scale of something like 20,000 people that would be resettled, which is nothing looking at the amount of refugees in Turkey. So this is not going to work in no way whatsoever.
Mr. Kouloglou, it won't help your native country then with all the migrants currently there?
There is an agreement made in September among the members of the to accept the relocation of 160,000.
And we're up to just over 900 now?
Actually, we're at 500 something.
500 out of 160,000. Last year, when Greece tried to change a little bit the austerity policy, they said, no, you have to stick by the rules. You have to apply the agreement. Now, why they're not applying the agreement right now? Because it's not about money, because it's not about banks, it's about democracy and human rights. Come on.
Yeah, Mr. Gülteşli, how do you react? Do you think, because Turkey seemed to be signing up to this idea?
Of course. I mean, EU should help Turkey. Let's face it. EU didn't do anything for Turkey up until refugees started now flowing into European Union cities. So EU should increase the money that's aiding to Turkey. Visa liberalization should be there. I think this should be all done, but not in this way, because this is rewarding Erdogan when he's doing all these terrible things in Turkey. They should not be rewarding Erdogan when he is on the eve of changing Turkish constitutional system into a presidential system, which most people in Turkey don't want.
Ms. Keller, this idea looks to be led by your native country of Germany. How do you react to it? Do you think we're putting too much focus across on Turkey?
I think it's wrong to look at Turkey as the solver of all our problems, because the problem that we have is one of reception of refugees and of distribution of refugees. But for that, we can't ask Turkey for help. That's an issue we have to solve internally. And now, yes, we should help Turkey to also receive the refugees that they have received, more than 2 million indeed. So it's really a lot that Turkey has been doing that side. But we can also not come to a sort of deal where we expect Turkey to keep all the refugees, which is against European law also to send them back just across to Aegean. But we can also not ignore the human rights situation in Turkey, which is very dire, where lots of people are dying in the curfews in the southeast, where the press freedom is basically non-existent, and many other problems. Just 3 academics for peace have been arrested simply for the act of calling for peace. So that's the state.
Any outspoken words against the government is being cracked down on, and we'll look at that in just a few minutes. But first, let's get a view from Turkey itself, Mr. Gülteşli. How do you see the European reaction? Are you very disappointed in the EU's reaction?
I'm very disappointed. I think EU is betraying its own values and principles. I'm not against EU talking to Turkey at all. EU should have started talking to Turkey many years ago. So I'm absolutely not against talking between Turkey, between Erdogan and Chancellor Merkel and EU. But what is disappointing me is that the European Union seems to be, as Mr. MEP said, that bargaining over its values. It seems that Erdogan has been very successful in buying the silence of European Union when he's doing all these terrible things in the country. And Chancellor Merkel and the others, it seems to be not bothered at all.
Indeed, we really do. It appears that we're seeing that because of the migration crisis and because of the EU's failure to cope with that, they're now opening up membership to Turkey. How does Turkey still want EU membership? Because these talks have been in stalemate for many years, and it did look like Turkey had kind of turned in the other direction at this stage.
No, I think Erdogan can't care less about EU membership when he is asking for a very strong presidential system in Turkey, which is against all European standards. So I don't think he can care less about EU membership. But what he's caring about a possible snap elections in Turkey, or a referendum in which the presidential system will be voted. So he's trying to give the impression, the image that EU is behind himself.
Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu, do you think the EU would be interested in having Turkey as a member if it wasn't for this crisis? Do you is it genuine to say that things are accelerating, that we're going to invite them in because of the crisis?
Listen, Europe is becoming the kingdom of hypocrisy. We are living in a kingdom of hypocrisy. They don't care at all. They don't care about neither Turkey, they don't care about democracy in Turkey. If they do care about democracy, from last year where Greek people voted a little bit to change the policies of austerity that had a devastating effect on Greece, they should have accepted the desires of the people. They don't care. They only care about their very narrow-minded, parochial political interests.
Do you agree, Ms. Keller?
I do agree that we have a huge hypocrisy in our approach to refugees and to Turkey, and that has been also causing the problem, because we've been helping Erdogan to get strong with this constant and for a year ongoing thing of, on the one hand, we had accession negotiations, but on the other hand, everybody said, like, be it Germany, be it France, no way, Turkey's never going to accede to the European Union, even if they become the new Norway. So this was not fair and this was not correct. And then Erdogan could go home and say, look, the Europeans, they don't want us because we're too Turkish or too Muslim or I don't know what. And that really has been making him stronger at home. And so I think part of the responsibility is to blame on the European Union, or rather the member states.
And when you look at the situation in Turkey, as we've been saying, things have changed in recent years. There's a crackdown on freedom of speech. And notably, the Zaman newspaper recently taken over by Turkish authorities. You're not allowed now really to say anything anti-government, are you?
Of course, we were critical of the government.
Before?
Yeah, indeed. And now, that's what you mean, the newspaper has turned into a mouthpiece of the government overnight. That's what happened with the IPEC media group, which was confiscated just 3 days before the elections. They turned overnight into mouthpieces of the government, propaganda machine.
Do you think it's acceptable to open new chapters of negotiation for EU membership with Turkey?
Well, for example, the chapters on justice and fundamental rights, I think, are chapters that urgently need to be opened, because there we have a lot of things to discuss. So I'm not at all against opening new chapters, but I think they should be opened in the course of negotiations, of accession negotiations, and they should not be opened, so to say, in return for a bunch of refugees that we're going to send back, which is against European and international law.
Which does seem to be what's happening at the minute. But indeed, you mentioned there that maybe a positive side of opening certain chapters. Do you believe that as well, Mr. Kulugulu? Perhaps that gives a motivation to Turkey to change, or is that pie in the sky?
Well, yes, as long as Turkey is going through Europe, it democratizes itself. So I think it's a positive idea. But under certain circumstances and under certain obligations, now I'm very pessimistic about that, because in the beginning of his career, political leadership, Erdogan made a lot of positive steps, but now he has changed course completely. And I think now Turkey is becoming part of the problem, not part of the solution. I'm afraid that if the situation in Turkey, in the southeast Turkey, with Kurds, continues like that, we will have refugees in Europe coming from Turkey, not only from Syria and Iraq and the other places.
If I may add a point, excuse me, it's because of Chancellor Merkel and former French President Sarkozy that EU has lost all its leverage on Turkey. It's gone. It's not there anymore. Our newspaper, my newspaper, we very strongly supported Turkish within the European Union. I fully agree. Erdogan did lots of good things up until 2010.
So what happened? Explain to us.
Well, because he was abandoned by Europe. You know, they let him down. You know.
And I think since 2010, because he thought himself quite strong, I think he started drifting towards authoritarianism, and there was no checks and balances. And EU said, as you just described, Sarkozy said it time and again, loud and clear. He said, even if Turkey fulfills all the criteria, Turkey will never be a member of Turkey. And the message was,
so the EU snubbed him until they needed him.
Now he's taking the revenge.
When we look at the human rights questions as well, there's also how much pressure do you think we can put on Turkey to step up in human rights when you see what the EU is doing? I mean, we have, you know, these hundreds of thousands of refugees that we're leaving. We're sending them back with tear gas, putting up barbed wire fences.
Europe has a reputation to lose, but it's not much left of that reputation, because just remember that the Geneva Convention was invented here in the European Union, which didn't exist then, but in Europe, to cope with the effects of the Second World War, to give finally protection to people in need, people who are fleeing from war and persecution. So we invented it. Our forefathers and mothers invented it. And now we're breaking the same Geneva Convention, because we think, as comparatively still one of the richest areas in the world, with 500 million inhabitants, we're not able to cope with 1 million or even 2 million refugees. I think it's incredible. It's so unacceptable, and we're leading, so to say, as a bad example for the world.
Well, that's one question, because Turkey hasn't signed up fully to that Geneva Convention, and that's part of the question is, how can we say that sending refugees back there? Syrians have temporary protection in Turkey, I understand, but anybody from Afghanistan, Iraq, technically, if the EU sends them back to Turkey, Turkey could send them back to war zones.
Well, you know, I mean, there is a violation of every international law existing concerning refugees, and this is going quite a few months right now, you know. And you cannot give lessons to somebody about democracy if you are not respecting democracy yourself. That's what happened here.
Turkey is certainly not a safe third country. As it's described in the European Procedures Directive, we have laws saying what is a safe third country and what not. Turkey does clearly not fulfill those criteria. So I guess it's going to end up in court.
Because a safe third country for failed asylum or sending people back who had asked for asylum, that would mean that they would get refuge, that they would get allocation. Where does Turkey fall down? Is it because it has 2.7 million refugees it's already trying to give accommodation to, as we say, more than the EU? Where does it fall down at being safe on that level?
Turkey would have to fully respect the human rights of those refugees and not send them back to a place of unsafety. And Turkey is sending back Syrians to Syria, to a war zone. And indeed, that is the Syrian issue. And as you rightly mentioned, there is no protection of what sort whatsoever for any non-Syrian refugees. So clearly, Turkey is not a safe third country.
Well, I think
Yes.
Erdogan, we should give him due credit because he did a lot for refugees, first of all. I mean,
More than
so
the
many,
EU.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes,
so
that
many
is true.
people have been in Turkey. Turkey opened the door, so I think he deserves a good credit. But the problem is, EU is now trying simply outsourcing his problem to Turkey, thinking Erdogan is now a stabilizer in the region, in his country. He's not. He's a destabilizer in his own country and in the region. And you are sacrificing your principles and values. The credibility of EU in Turkey is gone. It's not there anymore.
So before we conclude then, do we think Turkey will ever be a part of the EU, an EU member? Are we going to seriously go down this road of negotiations, or is it just trying to get them to accept the refugees?
I hope that Turkey will one day be a member of the European Union, but a lot of things need to change until then.
Mr. Kulugu?
Yes, I fully agree, and I do support the entrance of Turkey in the European Union, absolutely. And I hope that both, not only Turkey, but also the European Union will change.
Okay. Mr. Guldash,
I
you
think European
still want your
Union
country to be
committed
in?
gross mistakes, cardinal sins in dealing with Turkey. When Erdogan was very sincere, serious in dealing with reforms and other issues, EU just turned a blind eye. Turkey should be a part of EU, must be a part of European Union. There's no doubt on that. But under Erdogan's regime, there's no way that Turkey will get closer to the European Union standards and norms.
Okay, to all my guests, thanks very much for giving us some insight into the negotiations there and the relationships between the EU and Turkey. Thanks also to you at home for having watched. Do stay with us. So after the news, we'll be back for the second half of Talking Europe. Then I will be joined by the new British ambassador to Paris, where we'll be talking about the Brexit, another big EU debate going on this year. See you then.